All eyes were locked on the row of white plastic chairs positioned on the right side of the main stage where several BTS members had gathered to show support for Jin at his exclusive concert event that was held behind closed doors but still echoed with the deafening love of fans gathered just outside the venue. The late afternoon breeze rustled softly through Suga's oversized shirt and knitted beanie as he sat calmly, while Jimin, right beside him, had an unusually alert expression as if soaking in every micro moment of the ongoing program. And just when everything seemed to be in perfect order with the MC's voice occasionally drawing light laughter from the crowd, an unexpectedly bizarre and unscripted moment disrupted the flow among the idols. Jimin suddenly leaned in slightly and brought his mouth close to Suga's left ear while covering his lips with one hand, a swift movement that immediately pulled attention without making a sound. And within just 2 seconds, Suga's entire facial expression shifted drastically as he pulled back slightly, eyebrows raised in surprise, eyes narrowing at Jimin as though trying to confirm whether he really heard what he thought he heard. Yet before he could even form a verbal reaction, Suga chuckled quietly and instinctively covered part of his face with his left hand, a response so spontaneous and revealing that it instantly caused a ripple of curiosity among everyone seated nearby, because clearly this was not part of the event, not a rehearsed skit, not even something that could be anticipated. Even a few staff members standing behind the group exchanged silent looks of intrigue, because no one but Jimin and Suga knew what had just been whispered. And when Jimin himself began laughing softly, clutching his chest like he was holding in something much bigger, the scene took on a stark contrast to the formal tone Jin maintained on stage, creating a new tension that magnetically pulled all audience attention away from the stage and toward this quiet but chaotic corner. In fact, one fan recording from behind the barricade could be heard whispering, "What did Jimin just say to Yoongi? They're losing it." And instantly dozens of cameras pivoted to capture the trio seated together. Jimin, Suga, and JUNGKOOK, who was seated just to Jimin's left and had already turned to observe them with wide eyes as if sensing something secretive had just gone down. His head tilted toward them slightly, clearly trying to catch the tail end of the exchange. But Suga quickly shook his head and motioned with a finger as if to say, "Don't ask." A gesture that only escalated the collective curiosity. Because when a secret is whispered in the middle of a high-profile event, followed by suppressed laughter and a deliberate refusal to explain, it sets off an uncontrollable chain of speculation. And up until that point no media outlet had the slightest idea what was said. But one fan's slow-motion capture of Jimin's lips appeared to show the first word starting with a T, though it remained unclear whether it was Taeyong, TikTok, or trending. And from there, online theories exploded in every direction, yet not one of them could be validated, especially when a staff member approached the group holding a folded white paper, which Jimin took quickly, scribbled something, folded again within seconds, and discreetly tucked it into Suga's jacket pocket without any visible acknowledgement. The subtlety of the movement almost went unnoticed, but fans' eyes are trained for the tiniest details, and from that moment, the nature of the whisper shifted entirely in public perception. Not just a joke, but potentially connected to whatever was written on that paper now quietly hidden by Suga. And as the camera refocused on Jimin, whose demeanor had now calmed, his eyes glinting with satisfaction behind the mask, no one predicted what would happen next when Suga slowly slid his hand under the table, unfolded the note with surgical precision, and read its contents without moving a muscle on his face. And right there in the thick of all the excitement, just as the crowd outside roared for Jin's next appearance on stage and the music faded to make room for his voice again, Suga remained motionless with the tiny folded note now opened delicately in his lap, his fingers barely twitching as his eyes scanned the message Jimin had written. And although no camera could zoom close enough to capture the ink on that crumpled paper, his expression was enough to send waves of speculation through everyone watching because after reading it, Suga did something completely unexpected. He froze for a full 2 seconds with eyes locked on the note, then slowly lifted his gaze to look directly at Jimin, not with laughter this time but with a face that mixed disbelief, amusement, and something more cryptic, like he had just read a private joke that only made sense to him and Jimin. And as Jimin casually glanced back, their eyes met in that quiet exchange that said more than words ever could, with Jimin raising an eyebrow slightly as if to ask, "You get it now?" And Suga simply blinked once, exhaled silently through his nose, and refolded the paper with a composure so exact it almost felt rehearsed, except it wasn't. Nothing about this moment was prepared or planned. It was raw, real, and yet utterly unreadable for anyone not sitting in their exact positions. And just as he slipped the folded note into the front pocket of his shorts, JUNGKOOK leaned in again, this time tapping Jimin lightly on the shoulder and whispering something with a confused look, only to have Jimin shake his head while covering his mouth, signaling he wouldn't be sharing the joke, secret, or whatever it was, even with his closest hyung on that side of the row. And that's when the fans outside started chanting louder, some calling out names like Jimin Appa and yoongi hyung, in waves that matched the rhythm of the event's background music. And though the spotlight had returned to Jin, it was undeniable that the true gravitational pull of attention had shifted entirely to this subtle, cryptic interaction taking place off stage, unnoticed by the performers but watched intently by those lucky enough to have their cameras rolling. And at that exact moment, Suga leaned back in his chair, eyes still on Jimin, and muttered something too quiet for microphones to catch but clear enough for fans with lip-reading skills to detect later in video replays. It looked like he said, "You're insane," followed by a chuckle that made the entire left side of his mouth lift for the first time all evening, a genuine grin that broke through the otherwise stoic presence he had been maintaining since sitting down. And the fact that Jimin didn't reply out loud, only smiled wider and drummed his fingers on the plastic armrest like he was enjoying the aftershock of whatever he'd set in motion, confirmed to everyone watching that this wasn't random. This wasn't forgettable. This was one of those rare, spontaneous interactions that would go viral not because it was flashy, but because it was unfiltered, intimate, and impossibly magnetic. And by now social media had already started clipping and zooming into the exact moment Jimin leaned in for the whisper, while fan theories multiplied by the second with captions like, "What did Jimin say?" and "Why did Suga react like that?" But the most unexpected reaction came not from fans or staff, but from the quiet man sitting 2 seats away, wearing a black cap with the letters New York embroidered on it. JUNGKOOK, who had been half focused on the stage until this entire interaction pulled him in, now seemed unable to shake his curiosity, glancing at the space between Jimin and Suga as if it held more weight than anyone was letting on. And just when the atmosphere began to normalize, just when the lights dimmed again for the next performance, JUNGKOOK did something barely anyone noticed at the time but would later become the new fuel for speculation. He reached over subtly and tapped Suga's leg with his fingers, gesturing toward the folded note still in his pocket, his eyes asking silently for answers, but Suga only responded by patting the note with his hand, then lifting his chin slightly as if to say later. A single gesture that reignited the fire for every fan desperate to know what was on that note. And as the intro music for Jin's next segment began to rise, the air shifted again, not because of what was happening on stage, but because everyone now knew that whatever secret Jimin had whispered, it was written, read, and preserved, not just between the two of them, but as something that may or may not be revealed at all. And just as the lights on stage flickered back into full brilliance, casting warm highlights across Jin's silhouette as he prepared to address the audience again, there was a peculiar stillness that lingered in the row of white plastic chairs where the whispered chaos had just unfolded, because while the official program moved forward with measured precision, the real performance, the one had planned and no script had accounted for, was still quietly unraveling in the front row where Jimin now sat with arms folded across his chest and a smirk playing behind his mask, eyes darting occasionally to the side where Suga remained unusually contemplative, hand resting over the pocket that now carried a folded message that had already shifted the tone of their entire presence there. And though the note had been tucked away with care, the atmosphere between them had taken on a new texture, something light yet electric, as if an invisible thread was being pulled tighter with every glance exchanged. Meanwhile, JUNGKOOK's restlessness became more apparent as he shifted in his seat, one hand resting on his knee while his foot bounced lightly, clearly still bothered by the secrecy that had unfolded mere inches from him without explanation.